Blood. A trail on the carpet, but no body in sight. Welcome to Rust Evidence. I am your host Silas Wren. This growing mystery-loving community is amazing. Drop a comment with where you're watching from. Reading your replies truly makes my day. Let's uncover the truth. It had rained in the night, not a hard rain, but steady enough to leave the boulevard slick and smelling faintly of soot and old leaves. The windows of the apartment on Boulevard Richard Lenoir, where Jules Maigret lived with Madame Maigret, were still beaded with it, and the grey morning light came in filtered and soft. The stove in the corner hissed gently, warming a pot of chicory coffee. A modest breakfast had been set, a heel of fresh bread from the corner boulangerie, slices of comté, and a pear with a bruise on its side. Maigret sat in his robe, large hands wrapped around a thick mug, watching the steam curl upward as if something might be written in it. Madame Maigret moved quietly in the kitchen, humming without sound, her small figure flitting between sink and table like a well-rehearsed performer. She was not a talkative woman, which Maigret appreciated. Their silence was never empty. It was a silence that had worn in over the years like a good pair of shoes. "Lognon telephone," she said at last, without turning around. He sounded as he always does. Maigret grunted softly. Inspector Lognon always sounded as if he were about to be blamed for something. He had a manner of speaking that made even good news seem accusatory. "He said it might not concern you," she added. But he didn't say it very convincingly. There was a pause. The smell of the coffee, the rain beyond the window, the ticking of the wall clock. Everything conspired to make the morning feel longer than it was. Maigret picked up the newspaper, but didn't open it. He let the words settle in. "It's a pension, apparently," she said after a moment, "in the 11th arrondissement." "Pension?" Maigret echoed, almost to himself. He pictured a narrow building, 3 stories high, the kind with lace curtains in the windows, and always the smell of boiled vegetables lingering in the stairwell. "They found blood," Madame Maigret added, setting a jar of jam on the table, "but no body." Maigret didn't move. He looked at the jam. Raspberry, his favorite. Then back at the steam curling from his mug. There was no sound but the rain against the window and the slow shifting of the building's old pipes. "You're not on the case," she reminded him gently, as if he might need reminding. "No," Maigret said. And then again, but his eyes had already lost focus. He was thinking of the pension, the rain-slicked cobblestones, the tenants who never looked at each other too long, the scent of dust and soup, the kind of place where people came not to be found, or not to be noticed. He rose, slowly, heavily, and went to hang up his robe. Madame Maigret said nothing, but there was a flicker of a smile in her eyes. She began to clear the breakfast things before he even reached the coat stand. As Maigret shrugged into his heavy overcoat and picked up his hat, he stood for a moment at the window. Below, the boulevard was waking slowly. A delivery boy on a bicycle, a man lighting a cigarette beneath an awning, a dog sniffing at a lamppost. Paris was still grey damp. He watched it without blinking. He did not know what had happened at the pension. Not exactly. There were no reports on his desk, no official call, but something in Lognon's uncertain voice. Something in the simple phrase, "blood, but no body," had settled itself in his stomach like a stone. He stepped into the hallway, shutting the door behind him with a softness that seemed deliberate. The clue wasn't in what Lognon had said. Not really. The clue was in what he had. Would you like the next section to begin with? Maigret's atmospheric arrival at the boarding house. The sky had lightened a little, though the clouds still hung low, pressing over the rooftops like wet wool. Maigret stepped off the number 69 tram and stood on the narrow sidewalk of Rue Popincourt, adjusting his scarf against the damp chill. The street was one of those half-forgotten tributaries in the 11th arrondissement, neither entirely residential nor fully commercial. A few faded shop fronts, a wine merchant with barrels stacked behind dusty glass, a shuttered cobbler's, a cafe with iron chairs still slick with rain. The pension sat quietly among them, its beige facade streaked from years of weather, a rusted bell at the door, and a worn sign above it that read, "Pension des Deux Marronniers." There were no sirens, no policemen cordoning off the area. Not yet. Maigret preferred it that way. He liked to arrive when a place still breathed normally, when the tenants still muttered to each other in stairwells and nothing had been scrubbed too clean. He rang. A moment passed. Then the door clicked open from inside. Ah, Chief Inspector. It was Lognon, of course, tall, drawn, already damp, despite the umbrella folded under his arm. His coat was too thin for the weather, and his expression had the same permanent air of apology it always bore. "I didn't think you'd come," Lognon said, stepping aside. "It's not your case." "It still isn't," Maigret replied quietly, brushing water from his sleeve as he stepped inside. The hallway was dim and smelled faintly of cabbage and bleach. The wallpaper, once floral, had faded into yellow-gray blotches, and the floor creaked beneath his weight. Who called it in? The housekeeper. Madame Venu. She's downstairs now, trying to make tea for herself, pale as a sheet. Says she found the blood this morning, near the third-floor landing. There's a carpet. I've left it as is. Maigret nodded. And the tenants? Mostly still here. 3 permanent residents. 1 who pays by the week. 1's out at work. A typist, I think, but the others are in their rooms. Lognon hesitated, glanced toward the staircase. There's no body, just a stain, not very large. Could be old, but she says it wasn't there yesterday. Maigret didn't answer. He stood for a long moment in the still hallway, listening to the faint hum of the building. A muffled radio from one room, the gurgle of pipes, someone coughing in the distance. It was all too ordinary. And yet, "Take me to the carpet," he said. They climbed slowly, their steps echoing, on the third-floor landing, where the corridor turned at a sharp angle. The carpet darkened abruptly, a rust-colored stain against the faded green weave. Not fresh, but not old either. Still damp, near the edges. Odd place for it, Maigret murmured. No window above, no plant pot to tip over, no radiator leak. "No," said Lognon, and none of the tenants admit to hearing anything. No shouts, no quarrels, nothing dropped. Maigret crouched, one hand on the balustrade, the other near the stain. Not touching, only close enough to feel the dampness, the weight of it. Something had bled here. Something human, most likely. He straightened, slow, as always. "Introduce me to Madame Venu," he said. "Then I'll speak to the tenants, one by one." Lognon blinked. "You think it's worth the time?" Maigret didn't answer. He was looking not at the stain now, but at the row of closed doors along the corridor. One door had a scarf tucked into the frame to stop the draft. Another had 2 doormats, as if for different shoes, small things. Too small to explain, and too small to ignore. "I think," Maigret said finally, "that someone in this house is very tired." And with that he turned and descended toward the kitchen, where Madame Venu waited with shaking hands and a chipped porcelain teacup. The kitchen was tucked in the rear of the pension, behind a creaking door that opened into a narrow space thick with the smell of boiled onions and damp linoleum. Madame Venu sat at the small table beneath a window that let in gray light, a frayed shawl drawn over her shoulders. Her fingers, knotted and pale, clutched a teacup that rattled faintly against the saucer as Maigret entered. She looked up, and her eyes, small, pink-rimmed, blinked at the sight of him. Then, with a slight tilt of her head, as though assessing the weight of his presence, she nodded in quiet recognition. "You're not the one who came earlier," she said. Her voice was breathy, uncertain. "But you're the one they send when things are serious." Maigret pulled out the opposite chair, sat down slowly. He removed his hat, setting it on the table beside him, and glanced at the chipped teapot between them. "Only if there's something to be serious about," he replied mildly. Madame Venu gave a small shrug, more tired than evasive. She had the look of someone who had lived in pensions most of her life, or at least long enough to understand how they wore people down. The shared walls, the thin ceilings, the half-privacy of doors that never quite closed tight. I sweep that staircase every morning, she said, looking down into her cup. Every morning, the tenants complain about the smell of feet, so I do it early. 6 o'clock today, and that stain, it wasn't there yesterday. You're sure of that? As sure as I am of my name. Maigret said nothing for a moment. He watched her fidget with the edge of her shawl, pulling threads unconsciously. Who lives on that floor? He asked quietly. 3 rooms, she replied. Monsieur Keller at the far end, an old Swiss man, very quiet. He's been here 6 years. Always pays on time. Never a visitor. Then the middle room that's vacant now. The previous tenant left last week, and the nearest door, just by the turn, that's Madame Serre. Madame? She nodded. Widow. Mid-40s, I think. Pale woman. Keeps to herself. She's only been here a few months. Did she work? No. Said she did embroidery from home, but I've never seen any. She gets letters, though. Every week, always the same. Envelope. Blue with a typed address. Maigret looked out the small window. Raindrops raced each other down the glass. Somewhere above, a toilet flushed. The pension seemed to breathe, slow and shallow. Did she seem troubled? Madame Venu hesitated. No more than the rest. I thought maybe she'd come here to forget something. That was a common thing, Maigret knew. People took rooms in places like this when they wanted to disappear without the drama of escape. The kind of vanishing that didn't require trains or passports, just time and silence. He pushed his chair back and rose. Thank you, madame. I may ask more later. She looked up, her lips twitching as if to say something more. Then thought better of it. He left her with the tea, the shawl, and the softly dripping sink. Back in the corridor, Lognon stood near the 3rd floor landing, rubbing his hands together for warmth. You think it's Madame Serre? He asked. I think she lives closest to the stain, Maigret replied. That's not the same thing. He walked to the nearest door. Pale wood, scratched around the knob, a hand-painted number 6, hanging slightly askew. He knocked, twice, then once again. A pause. Then the faint sound of someone moving inside, not footsteps, but the rustle of fabric. Maigret waited. The door opened, just enough to reveal part of a face, a woman's face, tired and pale with dark hair swept back behind her ears. The eyes were cautious but not fearful. Yes, she said, voice low. Madame Serre? I'm Chief Inspector Maigret. She didn't move, nor did she widen the door. I've already spoken to the other inspector, she said. Yes, but I'd still like to speak with you, if you don't mind. Another pause. Then she opened the door fully and stepped aside. The room was dimly lit, the curtains half drawn against the grey morning. A low table held a stack of unopened letters, bound with string. A single armchair faced the wall, where a small radio played a soft waltz on low volume. She gestured to the chair. I don't have much company. Maigret nodded and sat down. She didn't. The woman stood near the dresser, arms crossed lightly, her face composed but far from relaxed. You've been living here long? Since January. Do you know your neighbors? No. He nodded again. Did you hear anything unusual last night? Voices? Movement? No. She said it flatly, without hesitation. But Maigret noticed she didn't blink. He waited. The silence filled the room like steam in a bath, not pressing, but enveloping. Madame Serre, he said gently. There was blood found outside your door this morning. She didn't look surprised, but she didn't look puzzled either. I saw it when I went to the toilet, she said. I stepped over it. What time? Just before 6. Did you mention it to anyone? No. He looked at her face, the paleness, the faint smudge under one eye that had been dabbed at, but not covered fully. A thread hung from the cuff of her sweater. Were you expecting anyone last night? No. Another silence. Maigret let it linger. He could hear the faint tapping of rain on the window pane. Do you often receive letters? Her eyes flicked toward the stack on the table. From my sister. She's in Lyon. All from the same person. A pause. Yes. Migrate stood slowly, adjusting his coat. I may come back later, he said. She nodded. I'll be here. Outside in the corridor, Lognon waited with a notebook, half open. Well? He asked. She's lying, Maigret said simply. About what? Maigret looked at the carpet again, then back at the closed door. About nothing. Or everything. I don't know yet. He started back down the stairs, slowly, as if every step were part of the thought process. She's the kind of person, he murmured, who's trying not to react. Lognon followed, perplexed. Isn't that what innocent people do? No, Maigret said, pausing at the bottom of the stairs. That's what people do when they don't want to give themselves away, not because they've done something wrong, but because something wrong has happened near them. He turned toward the door to the street, pausing to light his pipe. Let's speak with Monsieur Keller, he said. Then I'd like to know who left that vacant room last week, and why. Outside, the rain had stopped, but the street glistened with the memory of it. A puddle reflected the window of the third floor, where behind the lace curtain, someone watched and didn't move. The door to room 9 opened with the same dry creak as all the others. Monsieur Keller stood in its frame, leaning slightly on a cane, his neatly trimmed white beard forming a square around his mouth. He wore a wool waistcoat buttoned to the throat and slippers on his feet, though it was still morning. Inspector, he said, in a tone more courteous than curious. You'd better come in. I suppose this is about the stain. Maigret followed him inside, ducking slightly through the low door frame. The room smelled faintly of old tobacco and mothballs, but it was clean, precisely so. The bed was tucked tight at the corners, and the ashtray on the desk held only a single stub, placed there as if by rule. Monsieur Keller settled himself into a high-backed chair by the window, where a rubber plant leaned listlessly against the glass. He rested both hands on the cane in front of him, and looked at Maigret without blinking. You've lived here long? Maigret asked, lighting his pipe slowly. 6 years, Keller replied. Since I retired, my wife passed in Lausanne. I wanted to be somewhere smaller, more anonymous. Are you anonymous here? Keller allowed himself the faintest smile. To the world, yes. To the house, no. You'd be surprised how little escapes notice in a place like this. Walls thin as paper, leaves overlapping. Maigret nodded. You heard something last night. I heard the radio in the next room, Keller said, gesturing toward the wall. Faint music, a waltz. I think. That woman, Madame Sarah. Always listening to music that seems older than she is. Anything else? Keller hesitated. I heard footsteps around midnight. Just once, just above the stain. Then quiet. One person. I believe so. They moved carefully. No voices. You know the room next to hers is empty. It's been empty for 5 days, Keller said quickly. The man who rented it left in the middle of the day, without saying goodbye. He was an odd fellow. Kept hours that didn't make sense. Name? Drouin. Jacques Drouin. French, I suppose. But not Parisian. The kind who wears gloves even in warm weather. Maigret nodded slowly. Did he seem friendly with anyone here? Not friendly, but he had a tension with Madame Sarah. I couldn't say more. I saw them speak once in the stairwell. Not an argument. Just close, too close to be strangers, not warm enough to be friends. Maigret stood, looking around the room again. The simplicity of it appealed to him. Plain walls, no unnecessary objects. A small bookshelf held volumes of German poetry and old technical manuals. Thank you, Monsieur Keller. If I may, Keller said before Maigret reached the door. This stain. Do you believe something happened to her? Madame Sarah. I don't know yet, Maigret said truthfully. But I don't think it's only a stain. Keller gave a small nod and returned his gaze to the rain-streaked window. Back in the corridor, Lognon met Maigret with a notebook in hand. Drone was real, he said. Registered with the housekeeper under that name, though I doubt it was his own. No employer listed. Paid in cash. Did Madame Cyr know him? Claims not to. Said she saw him once or twice. Nothing more. She's lying, Maigret said again. But not out of guilt, out of fear. They descended the stairs, slowly. The pension had grown quieter. The radio upstairs had gone silent, and even Madame Venu no longer moved about the kitchen. What do we know about this Drade? Very little. No known address. No police record under that name. But he left something behind. Maigret raised an eyebrow. In the room he rented, I had them unlock it for me. There's almost nothing, but he left a scarf. A scarf, folded under the mattress, cheap wool, stained on one end, dried blood. Maigret stopped at the bottom of the stairs. Has anyone else been inside the room? No. Madame Venu said she was saving it for cleaning. She's been short on help. Maigret stood still for a long moment, puffing his pipe. The smell of wet wood and old food curled around him. He bled, Maigret said. Not her. Or at least, not only her. Lognon looked confused. Then where's the body? Maigret didn't answer. He pushed open the front door and stepped into the street. The rain had stopped entirely, leaving behind that strange expectant hush that only comes afterward. A boy walked past, dragging a wooden cart with squeaky wheels, across the street. A cat sat on a windowsill, blinking slowly. Maigret lit another match for his pipe. If he's dead, he said, then someone hid him. But if he's alive, he's not far. Lognon glanced around. You think he'll come back? No, Maigret said. But someone is waiting to see if he does. He flicked the match away and turned to face the building. The windows were still. The curtains unmoving. Let's walk, he said finally. Not far, just around the block. I want to see what kind of view this place gives at night. Lognon frowned. You think someone was watching? Maigret nodded. I think the carpet was cleaned up once before, and someone came back last night to see if it had stayed that way. They began a slow circle around the block, shoes slapping softly on damp cobblestones. The air had that faint post-rain metallic scent. They passed narrow alleys, shuttered storefronts, balconies with sagging laundry. When they returned to the front of the pension, Maigret paused again, this time across the street, and looked up at the third floor. One window had its curtains slightly parted. A shadow moved behind it, just for an instant. He didn't point it out. He only nodded to himself. Back inside, they found Madame Venu in the stairwell, clutching a small envelope. This just arrived, she said, breathless. For Madame Cyr. Same envelope as always. I thought it strange, arriving midday. The post doesn't usually come twice. Maigret took it gently. The envelope was damp at one corner, but the handwriting was precise. The postmark was Lyon. His thumb pressed against the paper, something stiff inside. A photograph, perhaps. I'll return it to her, he said. But he didn't go upstairs immediately. He turned instead into the common sitting room, unused and dim, with a sofa that smelled of mildew and two armchairs facing each other like reluctant combatants. He sat, folded the envelope in his coat pocket, and waited. 10 minutes passed, then 15. From the hallway a door creaked. Footsteps, slow, hesitant. A figure descended the stairs, one hand trailing along the wall. Madame Cyr. She paused when she saw him. I came to ask. I know, Maigret said. Let's talk. She didn't move. He reached into his pocket and held up the envelope. This came for you. Her face changed. Not fear, not exactly. But something gave way, a mask, dropped only slightly. May I? He handed it to her. She took it and sat slowly across from him, her fingers running over the paper. Do you want to open it? Maigret asked. No. He waited. I used to, she said. I don't anymore. The room was quiet. Dust danced in the pale light. What happened between you and Drone? Her hands tightened. We were lovers, she said. The words were barely audible. Once. And last night. She shook her head. He came drunk. Wanted money. I told him to leave. He pulled me down. I bit his hand. He hit his head. He bled. She looked up at him. I left him there. In the hall. But in the morning, he was gone. Margaret said nothing. I thought he was dead, she whispered. He might be, Margaret said. Or he might be waiting for something, or someone. She looked at the envelope again. Do you want to see what's inside? He asked. She opened it. It was a photograph, black and white. 2 people, herself and a man, smiling. On the back, a single line in neat blue ink. You don't disappear from me. She closed her eyes. Margaret watched her in silence. The photograph lay between them, its creased edges curling slightly, where Madame Sierra had set it down. Her hands were still on her lap, fingers motionless, as though releasing the image had also released the tension from her body. Margaret didn't touch it. He didn't need to. The handwriting was sharp and unmistakable, the sort of threat that dressed itself as memory. Has he written before? Margaret asked, voice low. She gave a faint nod. Every week. Sometimes just an empty envelope. Sometimes a letter. Once a bracelet. Nothing of value. Just. She searched for the word, but couldn't find it. A reminder, Margaret offered. Yes. Outside, footsteps passed on the pavement. A quick shuffle, then silence again. The pension seemed to absorb all sound, its old walls like lungs filled with stale air. Margaret leaned forward slightly, resting his forearms on his knees. And you never told anyone. To whom would I have spoken? She asked. Madame Venu? The other tenants? What would I say that a man I once lived with now haunts me by post? You lived together. She hesitated. For 6 months, in Lyon. I left without telling him. I thought it would end things. It rarely does. Margaret murmured. Madame Serre exhaled and looked down at her hands. He wasn't cruel at first, just possessive, then suspicious. And then one day I realized I hadn't left the apartment in a week without asking permission. I left while he was at work. He never tried to find you in person. I moved twice, changed my name once. Then this. She gestured at the pension, at the worn rug, the smoke-stained walls. I thought I could disappear here. Margaret studied her quietly. She wasn't lying. Or at least, not in the way liars did. There was no need to lie, when shame spoke more clearly than deceit. He stood slowly, carefully folding the photograph and placing it back inside the envelope. I'll keep this for now. It may help if we need to prove anything later. She nodded, not looking at him. Outside, the sitting room, Lognon stood near the coat rack, fidgeting with his notebook. Something strange in the register, he said as they walked toward the reception alcove. I had a look while you were upstairs. The pension's register was kept in a low drawer beneath the house telephone. A long, cloth-bound ledger with lined columns and stiff pages. Names, dates, payments. The kind of document most guests never glanced at, and most proprietors filled out by rote. Lognon pointed at a page near the end. Look at the entry for Drone. The handwriting doesn't match Madame Venu's. Margaret looked. It was a tight, angular script, not the housekeeper's round, shaky lettering. The name had been signed by someone else. He filled it out himself. Possible, said Lognon. But no signature, just the name, address field blank. And the dates being corrected, rubbed out and written over. Margaret ran his finger down the column. 2 names above Drurain's. Someone had signed in with a ballpoint pen instead of fountain. Unusual. And directly beneath Drurain, a blank line. You think someone else stayed in that room after him? Margaret said nothing. He flipped back a few pages. Week by week, the same handwriting. Names of traveling clerks, an old couple from Metz, a student from Lille, all perfectly ordinary. Until Druin, then uncertainty. A gap, A correction. Madame Venu wouldn't have let the room without logging it. Unless someone didn't pay, Maigret said. Lugnon blinked. You think she was hiding it? No, Maigret said. I think someone was hiding from her. He closed the ledger softly and stepped away, pipe in hand. We need to speak with her again. Not in the kitchen. Somewhere quiet, where she'll feel off balance. They found her in the stairwell again, sweeping half-heartedly at the baseboards with a broom, worn nearly to the handle. She looked up when she saw them, then set the broom aside with a resigned little sigh. More questions? She asked. Maigret nodded toward the sitting room. If you don't mind. She followed without protest. Once seated, she smoothed her skirt across her knees, as though to gather herself. Did anyone stay in room 8 after Monsieur Drouin left? Maigret asked, without preamble. She didn't reply at once. She looked at him, then at Lugnon, then down at her hands. Only for a night, she said finally. He didn't give his name. Describe him. Late 30s. Nervous, carried a single bag, said he needed somewhere for just one night, cash only. I thought he might be running from a wife. She paused. He seemed angry. Did you clean the room after? No. He left early, before dawn. I didn't hear the door. Did anyone see him? Maybe Monsieur Keller. He notices everything. Maigret nodded. That aligned with what Keller had suggested earlier. Movement in the night, careful footsteps, perhaps not Drouin, perhaps someone else entirely. Did this man leave anything? Not that I saw. Then why was the scarf under the mattress? She looked genuinely surprised. Scarf? You said you didn't clean the room, that you left it untouched. I did. But you checked under the mattress? She blinked. No. Then how do you know he didn't leave anything? A beat of silence. Not long enough for a full lie, but long enough for uncertainty. I didn't think. Maigret stood. This man. He wasn't just staying one night. He was looking for something. Or someone. He might have come here knowing Drouin had been here. Or knowing about Madame C. You think he came for her? She asked. And for the first time, there was fear in her voice. Not just concern. Not curiosity. Real fear. I think she thinks that, Maigret said. Outside the sitting room, the front bell rang. A short, sharp buzz. They all turned instinctively. Madame Venu stood quickly, brushing invisible dust from her dress. Maigret held up a hand. Let me. He crossed to the front hall and opened the door. A boy stood on the stoop. Maybe 15, raincoat too large, soaked at the hem. You're the detective, the boy asked. Maigret studied him, pale, fidgety. I am. The boy held out an envelope. I was paid to bring this here, to Madame Serre. He said to wait for an answer. Maigret took the envelope, already turning it over. Same handwriting, same blue paper. No address, no postmark. When did he give this to you? Half an hour ago. Near the metro. Said it was urgent. Was he alone? The boy hesitated. He looked like he was waiting, glanced over his shoulder a lot. Maigret opened the envelope. One line. Same pen. Same hand. You think you're safe behind closed doors? I still have the key. Maigret folded the paper again, placed it back inside. He looked at the boy. Tell me where you saw him, he said. Exactly. And as the boy began to describe the street and the metro sign, Maigret lit a match, shielding the flame with his hand, the scent of sulfur, the flick of tobacco, the smoke rising slowly, all as steady as the thoughts moving through his head. They were close now. Whoever he was, Drouin, or the man who came after. He hadn't left Paris. He hadn't even left the neighborhood. And if he was watching, as Maigret now suspected, he was doing so from very nearby. By the time the boy had finished describing the corner near Rue Saint-Maur where the man had given him the letter, Maigret had already sketched the mental map in his head. A café with a chipped green awning, a shuttered bookstore, and the narrow entrance to a metro stairwell, that smelled of rust and yesterday's cigarettes. It wasn't far. A 5-minute walk from the pension at most. Close enough to watch the front door from a distance. Close enough to leave another letter without being seen, and to vanish into the metro like a sigh in the wind. Margaret handed the boy a few coins and watched him disappear up the boulevard, then turned back into the pension. He found Lognon still in the hallway, pacing. He was nearby. Margaret said, gave the letter to a boy. Same handwriting, threatening this time. Lognon's eyebrows lifted. We should bring her in. Protective custody. Not yet. Margaret's voice was quiet. He's watching. If we remove her now, he'll vanish. We have no name, no address, nothing. We could set a trap. Margaret shook his head. He doesn't act out of impulse. He waits, watches, sends letters. He won't walk into a trap. He'll sense it. So what then? We keep things as they are, outwardly. Let him think she's still vulnerable, but we place an officer in the building tonight. Discreet. Keller's room has a view of the front, and the back door needs to be secured. I'll take care of it. Maigret paused. Has anyone contacted Madame Sarah's sister? In Lyon. No known address. Try harder, Maigret said. He's writing from Lyon, or pretending to. She might know his real name. Longin scribbled in his notebook and disappeared through the front door. Margaret returned to the sitting room, where Madame Serre still sat in silence. She hadn't moved since he left. The photograph lay on the table, folded again. She looked up. Another letter. He nodded. Delivered by hand this time. The man was seen not far from here. Then he's not finished. No. Her face was pale, but calm now. A different kind of calm. The kind that settles in when dread becomes certainty. I should leave. You would never get far, Maigret said. If he wanted to hurt you, he already would have. He's playing a longer game. What kind of game is that? Maigret took the photograph and slipped it back into his pocket. One where the punishment isn't death. It's fear. She didn't reply. The silence between them was not hostile, but it was full of things. Neither could say yet. I'll place someone in the building tonight, he added. You won't be alone. He left her there, returned to the front hall, and lit his pipe. The tobacco tasted faintly of ash and rainwater. He stood under the coat rack for a moment, watching the hallway. The pension was too still. Stillness had always been more suspicious to Maigret than noise. He went back to the 3rd floor. The carpet still bore the stain, though it had darkened since morning. He crouched beside it again, pressing 2 fingers gently to its edge. It was dry now. There had been enough blood to concern Madame Venu, but not enough to suggest death. Maigret stood and faced the empty room, number 8. The bed was neatly made. The wardrobe stood open. The air smelled faintly of shaving soap and old fabric. The scarf had been sent to the lab, but Maigret remembered its color, brown with a red fringe, unremarkable. He moved to the window. It overlooked the rear courtyard, a narrow strip of cracked concrete and broken planters, nothing there. But across the courtyard was a tenement, with windows that mirrored the pension's own. Any one of them could belong to him. The man with no name, the man who might once have been Dreux. Maigret went downstairs again, past Madame Venu, who was now scrubbing a spot on the wall that no one had noticed, past the reception desk, and out onto Rue Popincourt. The air had cooled. The sky was clearing in patches, not enough for sun, but enough to let the gray break. He walked, without hurry, past the café, with the green awning, then paused at the metro steps, where the boy had met the man. From here, the pension was visible. Not directly, but enough of the 3rd floor peeked out between buildings. A careful eye could watch without being noticed. He checked the street. No loiterers, no faces twice seen. Just the usual, a man hurrying with his collar turned up, a woman pulling a dog along by the leash. Maigret turned, crossed the road, and entered the café. Inside, it smelled of wet floorboards and weak coffee. A man behind the zinc counter polished glasses and nodded at him. "Inspector, have you seen someone watching the pension?" The man scratched his head. "People come and go." "You mean today? Or yesterday?" "A man alone. Sits without ordering, or only orders once and stays." The barman thought. "One fellow sat near the back wall yesterday evening. Didn't touch his coffee. Just kept looking out the window. Nervous type. Stiff shoulders." "What time?" "8. Maybe past. "Did he speak to anyone?" "No. Left suddenly. Didn't pay." "Did he drop a name?" The barman chuckled. "They never do." Maigret gave him his card. "If he returns." The man nodded. "You'll be the first to know." Outside again, the wind had picked up. The clouds were in motion now, but the day still felt suspended, as though something important had not yet settled into place. Back at the pension, Maigret found Lognon at the front steps. "The lab called," Lognon said. "The blood on the scarf matches the type we found on the carpet, Group O. Fairly common." Maigret said nothing. They also ran a search on Jacques Drouin. No matching birth record, no employment, no taxes. "So the name was false," Maigret said, "as we expected. But get this, there's a report filed 2 years ago in Lyon. A woman reported being followed. Said she'd left a man, thought she was free of him. Gave the name Drouin, but police found nothing. She dropped the complaint." Maigret's eyes narrowed. "And the woman? Different name then. Lucien Marel. No forwarding address. But the photo on file." He passed it over. Maigret looked. It was Madame Cyr. Of course it was. "She tried once," Maigret murmured, "to bring him into the light, but the law couldn't find a name. She stopped asking. And now she hides again. But he's not hiding anymore." "Not entirely." They stood in silence for a moment. The light was fading. The pension cast a longer shadow now. "Tonight," Maigret said, "you'll be inside. Keller's room. Keep watch. If he comes near the building, I want to know. If he tries the door, follow. But no arrests. Not unless we must." "You think he'll come?" "I think he's already come. He just hasn't decided what he wants yet." And with that, Maigret turned back inside, where the walls still held secrets, and the stain on the carpet waited like a question that hadn't yet been asked properly. The evening came on slowly, as it often does in spring, with no real sense of urgency. Light lingered in the narrow streets, not with warmth but with a stubborn grayness that refused to leave. In the pension, nothing moved. The hallway lights flickered on automatically with the failing daylight, casting dim cones on the carpeted stairwell. In room 9, Monsieur Keller sat by his window as he always did, though this time with Lognon behind him, seated carefully in the darker corner near the door. Keller hadn't objected. In fact, he had seemed quietly pleased by the company. He'd even poured them both a small glass of kirsch from a bottle that looked older than the furniture. "He's been outside before," Keller said, looking through the glass. "Hasn't he?" "Yes," Lognon said, "and we think he'll come again." They both fell silent. The view from Keller's window gave a slanted perspective of the street and the pension entrance below. Across the road, the cracked facade of an old greengrocer's caught the last of the fading light. The sky beyond the rooftops was the color of slate. Maigret wasn't with them. He had returned briefly after his walk to check the lock on the back door and to post an officer in plain clothes in the alley. He hadn't stayed long. He preferred to wait elsewhere, where the mood of a place could be felt without the pressure of watching eyes. Now, as the hours slipped toward night, Maigret sat 2 blocks away in a cafe that served watery wine and burnt croissants. He sipped from a chipped glass and read the same page of the evening paper 3 times without absorbing a word. He didn't expect the man, whoever he was, to appear like a criminal in a novel. No disguise, no sudden break-in. That wasn't how people like this worked. This was about presence. A slow, psychological siege. Maigret pictured him, pacing a rented room nearby, smoking to calm himself, glancing every few minutes at the clock. The need to act would build slowly, perhaps unbearably, not to strike, not yet, but to see, to confirm that she was still there, still reachable. In the pension, Madame Sarah remained in her room. The radio was off now. No music, just the faint creaking of her footsteps from time to time, a chair scraping, silence settling in again like dust. Maigret had instructed Madame Venu to pretend nothing had changed. She'd done it perfectly, still moved about with her mop and her murmured complaints about the radiator, still set the trash outside as usual, still asked Keller if he wanted tea at 7 sharp. Only Keller, of all the tenants, knew what was happening tonight. The others remained behind their closed doors, unaware of the trap that wasn't really a trap. At 8:42 p.m., Loganon leaned forward slightly. There. Keller didn't respond. He didn't need to. He had already seen the figure across the street, just to the left of the greengrocer's. A man, standing still, coat buttoned tight, despite the absence of rain, hands in his pockets. Not moving. He wasn't looking at the pension, not directly. He watched the window above the entrance. Keller's window through the corner of his eye. Loganon stayed perfectly still. The figure shifted slightly, glanced down the street, and then stepped closer. Not too close. Just enough to see the hallway light flicker inside the glass-paneled door. "He's nervous," Keller whispered. "He's been here before. He knows the door." Loganon said nothing. Every instinct told him to move, to act, but Maigret's instructions had been clear. Not unless he crosses the threshold. The man didn't cross it. Instead, after a long pause, long enough to be seen but not remembered in detail, he turned, walked 10 steps up the street, and vanished into the metro entrance. No rush, just quiet disappearance. Loganon stood, looked down at the street, then over at Keller. "He'll come again," Keller said. "I know." Back at the cafe, Maigret paid his bill and left. He didn't need to be told the man had come. He had felt it. Something in the air had changed, like a tension released just slightly, then drawn taut again. He walked the neighborhood slowly, glancing in shop windows, nodding at a few familiar faces. A butcher smoking by his back door. A girl walking a terrier that barked at its own shadow. When he returned to the pension, it was almost 10. Loganon met him in the hallway. He was here, watched the window, didn't approach the door. Maigret nodded. "He won't come in." "Not yet. But he will." He looked at the stairwell, then up at the dim light above. "Has she slept?" "I don't think so." "Let her be. Tomorrow I'll speak to her again." He's testing the perimeter, trying to measure how far he can go. They spoke in low tones. The building around them seemed to listen. "He doesn't want to harm her," Maigret added. "He wants to return to the way things were. But when people realize that's impossible, they become dangerous." Loganon frowned. "You think he'll act soon?" "Yes." Because she didn't reply, he pulled the envelope from his coat, the latest note, now slightly creased, and tapped it with his finger. This was supposed to scare her into opening the door, into reaching out. She didn't. He looked toward the 3rd floor. He thinks she's growing stronger without him. That's the real threat. He left Loganon to the watch and went upstairs, pausing outside Madame Sarah's door. He didn't knock. "Madame," he said softly, just loud enough to carry. He was here. He didn't come in. A pause. Then her voice through the wood. "I knew. I'll stay near tonight. Don't open the door. Not for anyone but me. I won't but me." He stayed a moment longer, listening. Then descended, each step deliberate. In his mind, Maigret saw the pieces forming a shape. A man who couldn't exist on paper. A woman who changed her name to disappear. A bloodstain with no body. A scarf left behind. A message. "I still have the key." It was metaphorical, of course, the key. A claim of emotional possession. But Maigret didn't believe it was only metaphor. Somewhere, in a pocket or coat lining. The man likely still carried the real key to room 6. It wouldn't be used to enter, not unless provoked, but Migrat had seen it before. The slow ritual of reassertion, a knock, a note, a watchful presence. And when that failed, the key turned in the lock not to kill but to remind. And reminders could become violence when memory refused to obey. He stood in the entrance hall, pipe in hand, eyes on the street beyond the glass. He would wait again. That was how this would be solved. Not by rushing to the end, but by sitting long enough for someone to break under the weight of silence. The next morning broke quietly, with no incident, no sound in the night, no shadow by the door, no ringing bell or broken window, just a deep uninterrupted silence which somehow felt more ominous than any disturbance might have. It was over coffee in Madame Verneuil's kitchen that Maigret found himself thinking, not about the man or the letters, but about Madame Sierra's silence. Not her silence with him, but her silence with herself. She hadn't cried, hadn't paced, hadn't protested. That kind of stillness, Maigret knew, came from living too long with fear. You stopped reacting, not because the danger had passed, but because you no longer had the energy to pretend it might. Madame Verneuil was spooning jam into a small pot, while the coffee burbled behind her. The smell filled the kitchen, earthy and sharp. "You slept?" Maigret asked, though he knew the answer. She shook her head. "Keller did. I heard him snoring through the wall." It's comforting in a way. That old man, so regular in his habits, like clockwork, makes you feel the world hasn't tipped. Maigret smiled faintly. "You've run this place long. 7 years. Before that I was a cook in Montreuil. I thought this would be quieter." He sipped from his cup. "It usually is." She sat across from him and reached into a drawer for a cigarette. "She's a good tenant, you know. Madame Serre, never a problem. Pays on time. Always polite. Not like some who come through." Maigret nodded. "But quiet." "Quiet doesn't mean guilty," she said quickly. "No, but it sometimes means haunted." They drank in silence. Outside, a delivery van passed, rumbling low and slow. Somewhere a window slammed. Maigret finished his coffee, stood, and patted his coat pocket where the photograph still rested. "I'll speak to her again." Room 6 hadn't changed. It still carried that faint scent of rose water and cigarette smoke, and the curtains were drawn halfway, letting in light but not view. She was sitting at the table, hands folded, as if she'd been waiting. "I heard you come up," she said. Maigret took the chair opposite. "He didn't return last night. I didn't expect him to." "You're not afraid?" She tilted her head slightly. "I am. But I've been afraid for a long time. Now it just feels familiar." Maigret nodded slowly. He let silence open between them before speaking again. "You changed your name once already." "Yes, to Lucien Marel." She looked at him but didn't react. She knew the name would come up eventually. "In Lyon, you filed a report. Said you were being followed by someone you'd lived with." "I remember." "Why withdraw it?" "No one could find him. They told me I was wasting their time." "Do you remember the name he gave you?" "He used several, but the one on the lease was Drouin." Maigret exhaled slowly through his nose. "Then he reused it here. That tells me he wanted you to know it was him." "I always knew. He hasn't tried to enter." "Not yet. He will." Maigret studied her face. The paleness had not lifted, but there was something new in her expression, something settled. "You said once that you thought leaving would end things. I hope. What do you think now?" She met his gaze. "Now I think some people don't want to possess you. They want to be necessary to you, even through fear." There was a long pause. Maigret looked toward the door. "You kept the key to this room hidden in the drawer. But he's never tried the lock, because he still thinks he belongs here." She didn't respond. Maigret stood. "Would you recognize him if he were across the street?" Yes. Would you be willing to watch for him? A pause. What would that accomplish? He's not expecting you to look. He wants you afraid behind the curtain. But if he sees your face again, without fear, it may throw him off. And then we'll have a name and a reason to stop waiting. She didn't answer immediately, but as Maigret turned to leave, she said, I'll try. In the hallway, Lognon waited with a sheaf of papers in his hand. The lab ran handwriting comparisons, he said. The letters match the old Leon. Complaint, same hand, but still no ID. No matching prints. Whoever he is, he's either very careful or completely unregistered, or both, Maigret said. But he's local now. He's rented rooms before, moved through these streets. There's a pattern. He reached for his coat and lit his pipe. The tobacco caught on the second match. What do we do? Lognon asked. Wait again. Maigret nodded. Yes. But this time she waits too. That evening, as the sun bled faintly through the clouds and left the city in a haze of silver light, Maigret returned to the café near the metro. He sat at the same table, ordered nothing, just watched. At 7:20 p.m., a man appeared outside the greengrocer's again. Not the same coat, but the same posture. He looked down the street, up at the pension, then turned into a side alley. Maigret rose and followed. He didn't rush. No need. If the man was returning to a room, he'd take his time. If he was circling, he'd emerge again. Either way, Maigret needed to see his face. The alley opened into a courtyard behind a cluster of low buildings. One light burned in an upper window. The man had stopped halfway across, standing near a rubbish bin. He lit a cigarette, took 2 drags and dropped it. Then he turned. Maigret caught only a partial profile. Angular jaw, light beard, a deep scar at the side of the mouth. Not Dren, or not the Dren in any records, but the man from Lyon, surely, the same one Madame Serre had feared. The one who now watched her pension. The man froze when he saw Maigret, then moved fast. Not running, but fast enough to be deliberate. He turned the corner and vanished into a back stairwell. Maigret didn't follow. He didn't need to. He turned back to the café, where the boy had first delivered the letter. Inside, he asked the bartender, "Does that man come here?" The bartender frowned. "The one with the scar? Sometimes. Rents the room upstairs, I think. Not one of ours." That was enough. Maigret returned to the pension just as night settled in. He spoke briefly with Lognon, then climbed to the 3rd floor. Madame Serre opened the door without waiting for a knock. "I saw him," Maigret said. "He was near the metro. Same man. He's not far, but he's watching now more than he's acting." She looked away. "He's waiting for me to come to him." "Yes. And when you don't, he'll panic. That's when we'll get him." Maigret turned to leave, then paused. "When he comes again," he said, "don't look away. Just once, let him see you see him." "I will." And behind her, the room darkened as the streetlights flickered on outside. In the hallway, the bulb above the stairs buzzed faintly. Maigret listened to the quiet. The trap wasn't set. It had been set long ago. Now it only needed time. The morning arrived like a sigh. Pale light filtered through low clouds and gave Rue Popincourt the color of old paper. There had been no rain overnight, but the streets remained damp. The city's endless breathing. A fine mist clung to the café awnings and blurred the outlines of early delivery men, unloading crates of produce and bread. In the pension, all remained still. Room 6 was quiet. Madame Serre had not come down for coffee, nor had Madame Venu knocked on her door, as she sometimes did. There was no radio, no movement, no telltale creak of furniture shifting under slow weight. Maigret stood in the hallway on the 3rd floor, staring at the door. Something was different. The scarf had returned. It hung from the doorknob, the same brown wool with the red fringe, unmistakable, folded once, precisely, as though laid out rather than dropped. The edges were slightly damp. He didn't reach for it. Not yet. He stared at it a long time, as if it might reveal something simply by being there. Downstairs, Lognon had just come on duty, coat still buttoned to the neck. When Maigret called for him, his steps came quick and echoing up the stairwell. "Don't touch it," Maigret said as Lognon arrived beside him. "I didn't even see it," Lognon murmured. "It wasn't here last night." "No." Maigret finally leaned in, crouched slightly. The scarf had been placed with care. Not like a warning, no violence in it, but more like a calling card, a mark of presence. Not "I was here," but something closer to "I am." "Do you think he got in?" Lognon asked. Only one way to know. Maigret knocked twice. No response. He knocked again, softer this time. Then placed his hand on the knob. It turned freely. Not forced. Not broken. Simply unlocked. Maigret pushed the door open slowly, scanning the room as he entered. The bed was made. The curtains half open. The ashtray held a single stub. Everything in place, except for the chair. It was turned toward the window, and in it sat Madame Sarah, alive. But her hands trembled, fingers twitching over each other like she was counting something invisible. When Maigret spoke, her head turned. Her eyes were wide, unfocused, and yet she seemed to see him. "He was here," she said, almost in a whisper. "When?" "Early, maybe an hour ago, before sunrise. I'd been sitting in the chair. I didn't sleep. I just waited." Maigret stepped into the room and gestured for Lognon to remain in the doorway. He sat across from her, elbows on his knees. "Tell me what happened." "I heard the key in the lock." Very slow, then the door opened. He came in like it was nothing. Like he belonged. She stopped, then continued with a kind of mechanical clarity, her voice too flat to be afraid. "He didn't speak at first. Just stood there, watching. Then he looked at the table, at the photograph. He smiled. Not a real smile, just a twitch. Then he picked up the scarf from the drawer. He folded it, looked at me, and he asked if I still remembered him. "Did you answer?" She shook her head. "I couldn't. I just sat here." He came close, put the scarf on the knob. Then he left. No threats, no words. He just left. Lognon stepped into the room finally, eyes scanning the window, the street below. "You didn't call out?" he asked. He would have run. I wasn't afraid he would hurt me. I think he wanted me to see him, to see that he could still come and go. Maigret stood and went to the window. The sky was clearing now, soft bands of light sifting through. "He's still nearby," he said. He wouldn't disappear after that. Downstairs, the officer posted at the alley door hadn't seen anything. No one unusual, no sounds, but the lock had been tampered with, not broken, just picked, clean, deliberate. The man had experience. Maigret had him describe every passerby in the last 2 hours. Only one detail mattered. A tall man, in a black coat. Scar near his lip. Maigret's eyes narrowed. He didn't rush. He walked, like someone who belonged. By midday, Maigret had returned to the cafe near the metro. The barman saw him and gestured toward the back. "He's up there," he said. "Room 4. Came in just after dawn. Paid for the night, but he hasn't left. I saw the light on an hour ago." Maigret nodded once. "Call no one. Speak to no one. If he asks, you haven't seen me." The barman, now slightly pale, gave a nod. Maigret motioned to Lognon and the officer from the pension to take positions at the front and back exits. Then he climbed the stairs slowly. He didn't draw his revolver. It wasn't that kind of moment. If the man inside was violent, it wouldn't be out of rage. It would be out of calculation. Maigret understood that. At the top, he knocked once on room 4's door. No answer. He knocked again. "Police." A pause. Then yes. The voice was quiet. Controlled. "This is Chief Inspector Maigret. I'd like to speak with you." Another pause. Then the door opened a crack. Behind it, the man stood as Maigret had imagined him. Lean, Angular face, the scar now clearly visible, eyes sharp but tired. He didn't try to run. He simply opened the door wider and gestured for Maigret to enter. Inside, the room was bare. A suitcase on the floor, a half-smoked cigarette in the ashtray, the window ajar. "I suppose I knew you'd come," the man said. "Your name," Maigret said calmly. The man looked away. "Does it matter?" "Yes." He thought for a moment. "Julien Maigret." Maigret didn't blink. "Brother, husband." Maigret nodded. "You kept the name?" "I did." She didn't. Maigret sat on the edge of the bed. "You entered her room this morning?" "Yes." "Why?" "To remind her." "Of what?" "That she can't forget. That people don't just disappear." "No. But sometimes they walk away." The man looked at him, eyes dark. "You think I wanted to hurt her?" "I think you already did." He said nothing. "Did you leave the blood on the carpet?" Maigret asked. Morel shook his head. "That was the night I tried to stop her leaving. She pulled away, and I hit the wall. Not her. My hand bled. She didn't call for help." "You stayed nearby?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because she didn't come back. I thought she might. Eventually." Maigret stood. "You'll come with me now. You're not under arrest, but we'll talk more at the station." Morel nodded. "I won't run." "I know." Outside, Lognon waited at the bottom of the stairs. He didn't ask. He didn't need to. As they walked together into the brightening afternoon, Maigret lit his pipe and let the smoke curl into the air. He thought of the scarf, the blood, the woman sitting upright in a chair, as a ghost from her past stepped quietly through the door. There had been no evil here, just a long, slow corrosion of two lives, once joined, then fractured, then buried under false names and unanswered letters. As they reached the police car, Maigret glanced back at the street. Somewhere, behind a curtain, Madame Serre was watching, not afraid, just finished. By the time the formal questioning ended, it was late afternoon. A fine drizzle had returned, soft and insistent, draping the city in its familiar veil. Inside the Quai des Orfèvres, the windows fogged lightly with condensation as the warmth of the office met the cold from outside. Maigret sat at his desk, the room thick with the scent of wet wool and stale tobacco, listening to the quiet. Julien Maigret hadn't denied anything. No outbursts, no pleas. He spoke with a resignation that wasn't dramatic, just done. His story had the shape Maigret had already imagined. Married young, to a woman who outgrew the life he insisted they lead. Possessiveness mistaken for love. Then bitterness, silence, distance. Eventually, she fled. He followed. Not with rage, but with a kind of obsessive certainty that the ending hadn't been real. "I thought," Moelle had said softly, hands folded on the table, "that she'd come back if I reminded her gently. Not with violence, just with presence. A note, a visit, something familiar." But the familiar, Maigret knew, could be the most dangerous thing. It slipped in under the door like gas, invisible, sweet-smelling, and impossible to explain when you were already breathing it. Morel had tracked her with care, changed addresses, names, stayed one step outside the margins of legality. He'd never struck her, he claimed, never needed to. She was too polite for conflict, he said. She made herself small instead. I watched her do it. There were no charges for what he had done. No one had died. The blood was his own. The scarf, a gesture. The key, legally his, once. But symbolically, it said everything. "Do you want to press charges?" Maigret had asked Madame Serre earlier, when she came to the station late that morning. "No," she had said. "Not now. I just want to walk freely again." And Maigret believed her. She'd worn a different coat, pale gray, with a belt. Her hair was combed back. The same, but her posture had changed. Not dramatically, just a little more upright. Now, as the rain traced long rivulets down the office window, Maigret thought of her walking back to the pension. Perhaps she would move again. Or perhaps she would stay. Fear, once named, often lost its shape. There was a knock at the door. Lognon entered, dripping slightly, his coat speckled with droplets. "He's gone," he said, removing his hat. "Let him go on the evening train, southbound." Maigret nodded. "Did he speak?" "Only asked if she'd said anything." "What did you tell him?" "That she was safe." Maigret gave a soft grunt of approval. He opened a desk drawer and retrieved a bottle of Calvados, pouring 2 small glasses. "To endings," he said, offering one to Lognon. The inspector took it awkwardly, as though not quite sure he deserved it. "You think he'll come back?" "No," Maigret said. "He only wanted to be seen. Now he's been seen. And not as a husband or a ghost, just as a man in the street, lost like anyone else." They drank. Outside, the city darkened by degrees. The street lamps flickered on in the mist, halos of amber against the gray. That evening Maigret returned briefly to the pension. Not for a report, not for questions, just to sit. He found Madame Venu in the kitchen again, drying a saucepan. "He's gone," he said. "I heard," she replied. "She told me." "How is she?" Madame Venu gave a little shrug. "Quiet, but different. She went out for a walk, didn't take an umbrella." Maigret smiled faintly. A small rebellion. He accepted the cup of coffee she poured him, and sat at the little table again. "You've seen a lot of people come and go," he said. "Yes. Most leave quietly. Some don't know how. Will she?" "I think she already has." The room was warm, the kind of warmth that came from constant use, from steam and starch and repetition. He liked that. It felt real. As he stepped back into the street, the rain had strengthened. Not heavy, but steady, the kind of rain that deepened every sound, made footsteps richer, coated the cobblestones with shine. He didn't raise his collar. Just walked, slowly, his hands in his coat pockets, pipe unlit for once. The street was as it always was, a woman at a window, a delivery boy with a newspaper pouch. The hiss of car tires on the wet road. In this city, there were never grand resolutions. People didn't collapse into confessions under lamps. They murmured their truths in kitchens, on staircases, in the quiet of rooms they no longer lived in. That was what he understood best. The long, slow unraveling of fear. The way guilt lived not in the crime, but in the silence after. At the corner cafe, he paused. The barman saw him and raised a hand. Maigret waved once, then continued walking. No one would write this case up. There was no criminal mastermind, no clear resolution. Just an old scarf, a broken door lock, a woman who remembered too much, and a man who couldn't accept he'd been forgotten. But something had ended, and something else quieter, better, might begin. He thought briefly of Madame Maigret. She would have set out dinner by now. A stew, perhaps, or cold ham and potatoes. She never asked questions, but she always knew when a case had left its mark. At the end of the boulevard, the rain picked up. Maigret paused beneath a tree, shaking out his coat sleeve. The city blurred around him, not from weather, but from the quiet weight of people trying in their small, flawed ways to live with themselves. He smiled, just barely, and stepped back into the rain.